I think it's really the best work I've done for forever, pretty much.
David Gilmour doesn't speak often. He lets the notes do the talking. A single bend from his Stratocaster can say more than 1,000 interviews ever could. But when he does speak, especially about the guitar, people listen.
I guess all of us had the feeling that it was something quite amazing.
He's not the fastest, not the flashiest, but he might be the most soulful guitarist British rock ever produced. With Pink Floyd, Gilmour painted vast emotional landscapes, blending blues phrasing with psychedelic textures, always chasing a sound that felt timeless, human, and slightly haunted. So when a player like Gilmour reveals the solos he reveres most, the ones that shook him, shaped him, and made him pause, you know you're about to hear the very heartbeat of rock's most vulnerable moments. Because for Gilmour, a great solo isn't just skill, it's soul, a cry through the amplifier, a memory turned into melody. Here are the 5 guitar solos David Gilmour holds above the rest, and why they've stayed with him ever since. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments, what's the one guitar solo that's never left you? Number 5, Jimi Hendrix, The Wind Cries Mary. Gilmour once said that hearing Hendrix for the first time felt like a tectonic shift, like the ground of rock guitar had moved forever. But it wasn't the distortion or theatrics that stayed with him. It was this song. The Wind Cries Mary was delicate, ghostly, restrained, and in its restraint, it opened a door. Gilmour admired how Hendrix found emotional depth not just in speed but in silence, the spaces between notes, the bends that wept instead of screamed. There's something almost weightless in the way Hendrix floats through the verses. No fire, no fury, just a man speaking through 6 strings. Gilmour didn't just study it, he absorbed it. In later interviews, he admitted, "I learned that it's not about playing 100 notes. It's about making one note matter." That was the lesson Hendrix delivered here. Recorded in 1967, just weeks after Hey Joe and Purple Haze had introduced the world to Hendrix's chaos, The Wind Cries Mary was its antidote, a quiet storm drifting through a cracked window. Hendrix wrote it in a single night after a fight with his girlfriend. Gilmour always found beauty in that origin, the idea that something so wistful could emerge from real-world tension. He could channel frustration into poetry, Gilmour once noted. The solo is barely 30 seconds long, but within it, Hendrix manages to blend blues phrasing, jazz dynamics, and melodic control with startling emotional clarity. Each note is bent, not to impress, but to ache. It's a guitar whispering an apology. For Gilmour, who would go on to sculpt some of the most emotionally resonant solos in rock history, Hendrix offered something radical: permission to not play. In many ways, The Wind Cries Mary became the spiritual ancestor of solos like Comfortably Numb or Shine on You Crazy Diamond, moments when the guitar sounds less like a performance and more like a confession. Hendrix didn't shout in this song, he sighed. And that sigh still lingers in Gilmour's own phrasing, because sometimes the quietest solos are the ones that echo the longest. Number 4, Jeff Beck, because we've ended as lovers. To Gilmour, Jeff Beck was the guitarist who never stopped evolving. But it was this instrumental from the 1975 album Blow by Blow that made time stand still. In 'Cause We've Ended as Lovers, Beck turned heartbreak into a whisper. Gilmour reportedly described it as one of the few solos that actually made me feel something I couldn't name. That was Beck's gift, turning technique into tone and tone into tears. The track begins like a sigh, restrained, uncertain, almost afraid to speak too loudly. But it unfolds slowly, with every phrase carving deeper into silence. Gilmour has often cited Beck's use of volume control and phrasing as being otherworldly. The way Beck manipulates a note's swell, pulling it forward, then letting it fade like a passing thought, is something Gilmour deeply internalized. Written by Stevie Wonder but given life by Beck, the solo is less a performance than a private moment you've accidentally overheard. There's no chorus, no lyrics, just a melody that refuses to look away from the hurt. Gilmour once said, "It's the most human I've ever heard a guitar sound." The tone is warm, aching, and slightly distorted, as if the amplifier itself is holding back emotion. Beck doesn't race toward climax. He lingers. Every vibrato trembles with restraint. Gilmour understood that Beck wasn't just playing sadness, he was letting it speak for itself. For a guitarist like Gilmour, who built his legacy on minimalist grandeur, Beck's control was a revelation. There's a section in the solo, barely 5 notes, where Beck allows the space between sounds to say more than the notes themselves. That's the kind of wisdom you can't fake. It comes from scars, from endings. In the quiet corners of Blow by Blow, Gilmour found a template, proof that subtlety could be seismic. That heartbreak didn't need to scream. It could whisper and still leave a crater. Because when Jeff Beck let go of the flash and leaned into the silence, that's when he broke your heart the loudest. Number 3, Eric Clapton. Have You Ever Loved a Woman? Live at the Fillmore. Gilmour never chased Clapton's fame, but he deeply respected his phrasing, especially this live version of Have You Ever Loved a Woman? Clapton isn't showing off here. He's breaking down. Every note sounds like it's clawing out of his gut. Gilmour was struck by the rawness, the sense that Clapton had nothing to prove, only something to release. This 1994 performance, captured during his legendary 24 nights residency at the Fillmore, strips everything back. No walls of sound, no layered production, just a man, a Stratocaster, and a wound he can't quite close. Clapton stretches the solo like it's a confession, pulling single notes so far apart they sound like breathless sobs. For Gilmour, who has always leaned toward the lyrical and introspective side of guitar work, this performance was a revelation in vulnerability. Clapton's touch is gentle, but it trembles. His tone is clean, glassy, and exposed. And in that space, Gilmour heard a kind of emotional truth that transcended genre. In interviews, Gilmour has said that while many players try to make the blues bigger, Clapton made it smaller and more honest. "He wasn't dramatizing it," Gilmour once observed. "He was just telling the truth." That night at the Fillmore, the solo doesn't peak with flash. It lingers, wounded and unresolved. The phrasing is conversational, almost hesitant. Clapton seems to speak through silence as much as sound, like someone afraid to say what's really on his mind, but saying it anyway. For Gilmour, it echoed the kind of quiet power he always chased in his own solos. There's a line in the performance where Clapton pauses, breathes, and then lets out a single bend that feels like it's carrying every regret he's ever lived. That's the note Gilmour remembered. Not because it was technically impressive, but because it hurt. Because when the blues stopped being performance and became survival, that's when Clapton and Gilmour found something real. Number 2, B.B. King, Sweet Little Angel. Before Floyd, before psychedelic London, Gilmour was a kid in Cambridge listening to B.B. King on a crackling radio. Sweet Little Angel became a kind of blueprint, simple, slow, and deeply human. Gilmour said he learned more from King's rests than from other players' runs. This solo in particular, with its quiet dignity and aching restraint, planted the seed for Gilmour's own tone, sad, spacious, and sincere. The original recording of Sweet Little Angel dates back to the mid-1950s, but it never aged. King's phrasing on that track is more like conversation than composition. He plays a phrase, then stops, lets it hang, lets it breathe. To Gilmour, that use of silence was revolutionary. "It's what you don't play that matters," he once reflected. King didn't rely on distortion or speed. His weapon was Lucille, his beloved Gibson ES 355, and a sense of timing that felt almost supernatural. Every note had intention, every pause had weight, and in that space between phrases, Gilmour found emotional architecture. Sweet Little Angel wasn't just blues, it was narrative, a story told in sighs and bends. For Gilmour, this was the earliest example of restraint becoming power. There's a line in the solo where King repeats a short phrase 3 times, never changing it, only deepening its tone. To a young guitarist, that was alchemy, turning repetition into revelation. Gilmour later said that it taught him to stop chasing complexity and start chasing clarity. You can hear King's fingerprints all over Floyd's slow burns, most famously in Shine On You Crazy Diamond and Comfortably Numb. Not in mimicry, but in spirit. The long, lingering bends. The notes that ache before they resolve. That's not just style, it's legacy. When Gilmour speaks of influence, he rarely talks about technique. He talks about feel. And in B.B. King's playing, he heard the kind of feeling that could stretch across decades and still feel like a conversation with your own soul. Because B.B. King didn't just show him how to play, he showed him how to wait and let the silence sing. Number 1, Peter Green, Need Your Love So Bad. And then there was Peter Green, not the myth, not the meltdown, just the tone. Need Your Love So Bad is, in Gilmour's words, utterly perfect, not a wasted note. Every phrase shaped like a breath, every bend full of I ache. Gilmour has called this his all-time favorite solo, not for its virtuosity, but for its honesty. He once said, "If I could play just one solo for the rest of my life, it might be that one." It was Green at his most fragile and his most brilliant. Released in 1968 during Green's brief but incandescent run with Fleetwood Mac, the track is drenched in longing. Green didn't shout his solos, he sighed them. His touch was delicate, almost unsure, like he was afraid the strings might break beneath his fingers. And yet, each note cut straight to the marrow. The brilliance of Green's phrasing wasn't just in what he played, it was in what he felt while playing. The bends are slow, almost hesitant, but never out of control. There's a moment halfway through the solo where he holds a single note, lets it waver, then fades it out, not with reverb or effect, but with his own restraint. That was the moment that haunted Gilmour. He later recalled hearing that note and thinking, "I'll never touch that." Not because it was complex, but because it was true. Green wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to survive the moment. Gilmour has described the track as achingly human, and it's easy to hear why. Unlike so many guitarists of his era, Green didn't fight the blues. He surrendered to it. And Gilmour, with all his command of effects and atmospheres, always seemed to be chasing that same purity. That moment where a single phrase could speak more honestly than 100 riffs. In the end, Gilmour didn't choose Green's solo because it was flawless. He chose it because it bled, and in doing so, became eternal. Because Peter Green didn't just play from the heart, he played to it. David Gilmour has never needed a spotlight to prove anything. His guitar has always spoken for him, with vulnerability, with patience, and with a kind of quiet power that defies fashion or speed. The solos he chose weren't about showing off. They were about showing something, a crack in the armor. Each one shaped him, not just as a guitarist, but as a listener. From Peter Green's wounded elegance to Jeff Beck's whispered heartbreak, these moments helped Gilmour build a language of his own. A language of space, restraint, and soul. In the end, that's what music leaves behind. Not just the notes, but the way they make you feel when the room goes quiet. If these solos moved you the way they moved him, tell us in the comments. And if you want more stories behind the strings, subscribe and stay tuned. Because legacy lives in the tone we never forget.